Tonight, charges dropped against the man accused of causing the devastating Wooroloo bushfires. Braving the heat as parts of Perth hit 45 degrees and WA's summer hot spell breaks records. Fears the government is set to reject council plans to save Perth trees. And bulk billing rates on the rise, but many still struggle to afford visits to the doctor. Good evening, Pamela Medlen with ABC News. Charges against the man accused of lighting the devastating Wooroloo bushfires in 2021 have been dropped after prosecutors said there was no reasonable prospect of conviction. 3 years on from the bushfire emergency that destroyed scores of houses, one resident who lost her home says the community is still trying to rebuild.
It's a blaze burnt into the state's memory. The Wooroloo bushfires razed almost 11,000 hectares and destroyed 86 houses, including Jessica Blackwell's home in Gidgegannup after she was forced to evacuate and could not return.
By the time it crossed 2J Road, it was moving so quickly that they had already closed the roads and there wasn't that much of an opportunity, which is a bit different to normal. And then it all happened very fast from there.
But charges against Daniel Gunter Preuss, the man who was accused of starting the fire when he used an angle grinder during a total fire ban, have now been dropped. Mr Preuss was due to stand trial next week, but in court the prosecutor said as a result of further police investigations, the state considers there are no longer reasonable prospects of a conviction because it can't be established he lit the fire and caused the damage. The recovery process has been gruelling for Jessica Blackwell, but she's been in her new house for a year, unlike many others.
Now when I think about the fire, where my thoughts go to are the people that still are without a home, that haven't been able to rebuild for whatever reason, and a lot of it is not for lack of trying.
WA police say they're still treating the cause of the blaze as deliberate and they will investigate any new information uncovered during the court process. Kenneth Pung, ABC News.
Much of WA is continuing to swelter through a heatwave with temperatures in some areas soaring above 40 degrees. This is Perth's second hot spell since 2024 started, and it usually has only 2 severe heatwaves each calendar year.
It's another hot day in Perth, and these kids from Meekatharra commandeered park sprinklers to get some relief. But for others, midday is the best time for exercise, even when it's pushing 40 degrees.
I love fitness, and there's no better time of the day to do it. Condition the body to the heat. Just keep your salts up, keep your water up.
I don't know why people aren't out here doing this. This is it.
Memphis, the white rhino, won't be running up Jacob's Ladder. He prefers wallowing in the mud at Perth Zoo to stay cool and be protected from the sun. While an otter keeps the body temp down with fishy icebox. The airport was, as usual, one of the warmest places, but for some, it's a nice change.
Came from Marble Bar.
So how hot was it there the last couple of days?
About mid-40s. Pretty standard.
Pretty balmy here then?
Yeah, it's nice.
On days like today, it's important to stay hydrated and to stay cool. One of the best places to do that is here, Elizabeth Keys Water Park. But the bad news for those not used to plus 40 temperatures, there may be more to come.
Summer is certainly not over. We have got another month of summer left, and that means we are going to continue seeing that typical or classic summer pattern where we see a slow-moving west coast trough and a high-pressure system to the south of us. And what that means is we'll continue to see hot, dry days over the next few weeks.
We've already seen 3 days above 40 degrees this summer, with the rest of February to go. David Webber, ABC News.
WA's farming lobby has called for Federal Agriculture Minister Murray Watt to resign over the handling of a live export ship that spent nearly a month at sea with thousands of sheep and cattle on board. The MV Bahija pulled into Fremantle Port to re-provision. Veterinarians cleared the more than 15,000 livestock of any health or environmental concerns as authorities continue negotiations with the exporter. Last month, it was ordered to turn back 15 days into its journey to Jordan amid security concerns in the Red Sea. It's been anchored off the WA coast since Monday, while the federal regulator looks at plans to re-export the animals to the Middle East. The department says it's still assessing an application which would see the animals spend another 33 days on board. Mr Watt's office says he's legally unable to intervene and the exporter is responsible for delaying its application. But WA farmers say he should do more.
Murray Watt hasn't been over here, hasn't answered us whether he's going to meet with us, doesn't seem to be involved in the decision making at all. I think the department has been very slow. They've taken 9 days to make a decision. I think that's pretty despicable.
The Planning Minister, John Carey, has refused to confirm if he'll scrap a plan to protect Perth's trees. Perth has the least tree canopy of any Australian capital city, and advocates say the measure was intended to change that.
Medlen, a leafy inner western suburb within Australia's most barren capital city. It was one of 2 local councils which voted last year to protect their trees.
That was for trees over 8 metres high. If you were going to develop the land, you would need a development application to take down these trees.
The vote was described as a watershed moment, the beginning of wider protections to improve Perth's landscape and help combat the effects of climate change. But the ABC understands the WA government will reject the scheme.
These were one way, a very easy way, to lower carbon in our city.
We've seen in cities like Sydney that they can increase density as well as increasing tree canopy at the same time. I think the big question is, why is Perth so far behind the rest of the country?
Advocates fear the interests of property developers have muddied the waters.
That's false. It's a fear campaign being pushed by the City of Medlen and particular advocates. I absolutely reject that.
The minister says no official decision has been announced about the fate of the scheme. On 40-degree days like this one, it becomes apparent how a luscious canopy can help keep our cities cool. The state government says it's working on a broader metro-wide urban greening policy that will also respect the rights of private property owners. Kasen Ho, ABC News.
The UN's main agency providing aid for Palestinians is under pressure to restore confidence with its donors before its money runs out at the end of this month. At least 12 countries, including Australia, have temporarily suspended funding for UNRWA after Israeli allegations against some of its workers.
At one of only 3 entry points into Gaza.
And the police officers are pushing and shoving, and the protesters are doing the same.
Israeli protesters try to blockade trucks from entering. Hundreds have descended upon the Kerem Shalom border crossing for a week now, demanding no aid for Gaza until all hostages are released. In another blow for civilians in Gaza, the Israeli Prime Minister met with ambassadors to the UN, telling them the biggest UN aid provider to Palestinians must go.
UNRWA is totally infiltrated with Hamas.
The agency fired 9 workers and launched an investigation after Israel claimed they had participated in Hamas's October 7 attack.
UNRWA's life-saving services should not be jeopardized by the alleged actions of a few individuals.
The allegations prompted several countries, including Australia, to halt funds for UNRWA.
These are deeply concerning allegations. And we have made clear they need to be thoroughly investigated.
The UN agency is now in a race to persuade donors that they have responded inappropriately before money runs out at the end of this month. Time is everything. A new UNICEF report says supplies of nutritional food are virtually finished.
Another confronting figure from UNICEF. An estimated 19,000 children in Gaza are now orphans or have no adult to care for them. This girl was delivered by C-section. Her mother was killed by an Israeli bomb before she could name her child.
We've lost connection with her relatives. Nobody came.
Born into a dreadful war and a bleak future. The girl with no name. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
On the 40th anniversary of Medicare, new government data shows bulk billing rates are on the rise. It follows last year's budget, which raised the incentive paid to GPs when they bulk billed children, pensioners and concession card holders. Doctors have welcomed the news but say there's still a long way to go to make doctors' visits affordable for all.
Okay, so next week for the board report, we'll need...
Once Gemma Sims has paid rent and all of her family's costs, she doesn't have much left for visits to the doctor.
When I do access a GP, which I haven't for a very long time, it's really expensive.
She has a healthcare card, but she says she hasn't been able to find any clinics that bulk bill, and she's been prioritising her children's medical appointments.
I'm missing out. I haven't been to the GP in at least 3 years.
To help people like Gemma, in last year's budget, the government raised the incentive it pays to GPs to bulk bill. It says it's working. In the first 2 months, bulk billing rose 2.1 percentage points.
In November and December alone, just 2 months, there were 360,000 additional free visits to the doctor.
The Health Minister says some of the biggest increases in these appointments have been in regional areas and in Tasmania, where bulk billing rates have been low.
We need to have in mind continued access for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people in our community.
Of course we want to see more increases into the future, but we've managed in one short year to stop the slide and to start to see a turnaround.
When Peter Dutton was Health Minister, the bulk billing rates were about 84%. Under Mark Butler, just over 77%.
GPs want further increases to Medicare rebates paid to primary care providers.
If you invest in general practice, we get the outcomes that are needed for our patients.
That would help people like Gemma Sims.
I've seen no difference, and it's certainly not made it any easier for me financially to access medical care at all.
That means universal healthcare remains out of her reach. Rachel Carbonell, ABC News.
Tomorrow night on an extended edition of ABC News WA, state political reporter Kian Burke speaks to Premier Roger Cook in the first of our monthly in-depth interviews for Stateline. You can see the interview during the 7 p.m. news. You'll also be able to catch up on ABC iView. Despite 13 interest rate hikes since May 2022, house prices are on track to continue rising across the country, with Perth leading the way. Agents say the market is being propelled by renters and migrants wanting to buy their own homes, and buyers trying to get in ahead of interest rate cuts expected later this year.
And $1,050,000 for the third final call.
In Australia's second biggest property market, buyers are holding their nerve.
All finished. Well, the bid's here, ladies and gentlemen. Formally pass the property into this lady here. She'll have first exclusive rights at the vendor's reserve.
Behind closed doors and after some negotiation on price, Natalie manages to secure her first home.
It's definitely been difficult and stressful trying to figure out whether we'll be able to afford the mortgage repayments if interest rates go up, but hopefully now that they've started to settle, we should be okay.
Prices rose nationally by 0.4% in January and 8.7% over the year. It marked the 12th straight month of gains driven by Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. Darwin and Sydney rose marginally, while Melbourne, Canberra and Hobart went backwards.
Nationally, we're expecting house prices to rise in 2024, but probably at a slower rate than what we saw last year.
For those looking to break into the market, getting a home loan might be easier. The Reserve Bank is expected to keep rates on hold at its next meeting, but economists are tipping there might be rate cuts later this year.
$1,690,000. We expect moderate falls in property prices this year, averaging around 3 to 5%. Lower interest rates might provide a bit of support later this year, but the big risk to all of this on the downside is if unemployment rises significantly, and that could result in deeper falls in property prices.
For now, finding a dream home is still hard for most. Nassim Khadem, ABC News.
The Australian Institute of Sport's new Universal Guidelines on Concussion recommends all children sit out sport for at least 21 days after a head knock. The advice for all grassroots and professional sports has been broadly welcomed, but concerns have been raised about educating the tens of thousands of volunteers who coach kids. David Mark reports.
17-year-old Brianna Wong knows all about concussions.
I had symptoms for about a week and a bit, which was blurred vision. I had migraines. It was pretty bad.
Under new Institute of Sport guidelines, if she was concussed again, she'd have to sit out her sport for at least 3 weeks and be free of symptoms for 2 weeks before she could start contact training.
I think it's an amazing idea. With this now, you have a structure to follow and you know how long you're going to be out for. You know what the protocol is when it happens.
We're unashamed in having a real focus on youth and community sport because that's where there's an absence of healthcare practitioners. That's where 95% of concussions happen.
The AIS developed the guidelines with colleagues in Australia, New Zealand and the UK.
The best way to protect the health and well-being of athletes at the youth and community level is to have one set of guidelines that everybody follows so there's no confusion or disagreement.
But there are concerns players may not report their concussions.
If I report this, then it probably is going to mean that I'm 21 days out of playing. Then they may or may not be likely to report it.
Brianna's father, Terry, would have the job of explaining the guidelines to more than 100 coaches at his local club.
It does come down to education. I think most of our coaches and managers want to make sure that their players' welfare is at the forefront.
The AIS has also recommended professional athletes not return to contact sport until they've been free of concussion symptoms for at least 10 days. That would be a big extension on the current guidelines for the country's biggest football codes, rugby league and Australian rules. A spokesman for the Australian Rugby League Commission told the ABC it's reviewing the Institute of Sport's guidelines to see how they could apply to rugby league, while the AFL is also reviewing its current concussion guidelines ahead of the 2024 season. David Mark, ABC News.
Some of the world's leading social media companies have been accused of having blood on their hands during a fiery hearing in the US Senate. 5 tech bosses were grilled over whether they're doing enough to protect children on their platforms. Behind them sat families whose loved ones took their own lives after being victimised online.
The faces of the young and vulnerable held up as tech chiefs from 5 of the biggest social media companies took the oath.
This is my daughter, Olivia.
This is our son, Matthew.
Look at how beautiful Miriam is.
Republicans and Democrats want big tech to answer for the abuse and exploitation of children on their platforms.
I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people.
37% of teenage girls between 13 and 15 were exposed to unwanted nudity in a week on Instagram. You knew about it. Who did you fire?
The boss of Facebook and Instagram, Mark Zuckerberg, came under the most scrutiny.
Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered.
Senator, we are devastated. The head of Snapchat was also under fire.
There are a number of parents whose children have been able to access illegal drugs on your platform. What do you say to those parents?
We work very hard to block all search terms related to drugs from our platform. The CEOs defended their business practices, including child safety features.
We make careful product design choices to help make our app inhospitable to those seeking to harm teens.
It is time for a federal standard to criminalize the sharing of non-consensual intimate material.
There is a proposed law to rein in tech companies and hold them accountable for what's shared on their platforms. In a Congress paralysed by partisan divides and political infighting, even agreement on this issue hasn't been enough to change the landscape yet. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Washington.
And if you or someone you know needs help, contact Beyond Blue by phone or their website or Lifeline on 13 11 14. To finance now, the local share market and the Australian dollar both fell today after the US Federal Reserve poured cold water on hopes of an early rate cut. Here's Alan Kohler.
America's interest rate setting committee met last night, and after the meeting it was a game of two halves. The statement came first, and in it the Fed went from talking about when rates might go up to when they might go down, which is called shifting from a tightening bias to an easing bias. And then Chairman Jerome Powell held a press conference and was asked, what about March? And he replied, nah, sorry, unlikely. The US dollar jumped at that point, and on the share market, shoulders and prices slumped. So the Aussie dollar fell, and Australian share prices fell also for the first time in almost a fortnight. The banks that have been running hot had the biggest falls, while the lithium miners went down as well, as usual. But look, financial market punters might be gnashing what's left of their teeth, but this is good. The Federal Reserve has managed to get inflation under control without a recession and with barely an increase in unemployment at all. It's called immaculate disinflation. Markets and the Fed members themselves are forecasting much lower US interest rates, down from 5.25% to 3%. And that's good news for Aussie borrowers as well, because the Reserve Bank won't want to be a shag on a rock with a cash rate above 4% when that happens. And speaking of Aussie borrowers, as you've heard, the other side of the ledger, the asset side, is still rising, or at least the national median house price is, although it is getting patchy and the monthly growth rate is well into a decline, as you can see. And that's partly because the shortage is disappearing as the immigration comes down and housing completions rise a bit. And that's finance.
To sport, and Mitch Marsh fought back tears when accepting the Allan Border Medal as fellow West Australian cricketers Cameron Bancroft and Jason Behrendorff were also recognised. Bancroft won Men's Domestic Player of the Year, while Behrendorff was named Australia's Best Men's T20 Player. While Marsh thanked teammates and family for sticking with him through difficult times.
A popular winner who just became even more relatable.
I'm a bit fat at times and I love a beer, but I've had a few people come up and ask for photos this morning saying that they're a bit fat too.
The throwaway line punctuated an emotional acceptance speech in which Mitch Marsh thanked coach and captain.
You believed in me.
And his wife, Greta.
I thought I was done and dusted, but I often spoke to my wife about Dad, I just wanted to get one more crack at it, and it's been amazing.
A player who didn't make the most of his opportunities. Marsh once declared Australia hated him. But an Allan Border Medal win has capped off a great comeback tale after a season highlighted by an Ashes century and 200s at the World Cup.
To be back into the Test team now after a long time out, it's been an incredible 6 months.
And the winner of the Belinda Clark Award is Ashley Gardner.
For the second time in her decorated career, Ash Gardner won cricket's highest honour. An all-rounder, Gardner's bowling shone in particular as she took more wickets than any of her teammates.
I think my bowling has probably evolved a lot quicker than kind of what I was thinking.
He's not thinking about awards just yet, but Xavier Bartlett could make his national debut against the West Indies in tomorrow's opening one-day international match at the MCG.
I mean, it's just amazing to be here, and the opportunities to rub shoulders with these sort of guys. Yeah, still definitely pinching myself for that.
Fellow paceman Lance Morris is also in line to debut as Australia fields a relatively inexperienced side. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
Western Force coach Simon Cron says Sunday's pre-season match against the Queensland Reds will help shape his best squad ahead of the Super Rugby season. The Force flew to Brisbane for a modified game against the Reds, which will be played in 3 30-minute periods. Cron says he has a good idea what his side will look like when the season gets underway later this month.
We're a long way towards who we think would be there, but there's also just a couple of last positions, like who's secondary position, who would move to that position if there's injury. You know, just making sure that we have a little bit of depth in each position.
Margaret River surfers Jacob Wilcox and Jack Robinson have moved through to the opening rounds of the World Surf League Pipeline event in Hawaii in solid 3-metre waves. Wilcox elected to wear a protective helmet following a string of serious head injuries to other surfers at the break in the lead up to the event. The tour rookie will compete against Brazil's Iago Dora in his next heat. This ride saw defending champion Jack Robinson post one of the highest scores of the day, dominating his first round heat.
Yeah, it was a good heat. Had all the butterflies before the heat, and I was trying to let them fly, but yeah, it was like, whoa, like just first heat again, first day. So yeah, it's good to be back.
Now to a story about an inquisitive toddler who got stuck in a shopping centre toy machine. It took officers from a tactical crime squad to get him out.
It was a case of claw and order after mischievous 3-year-old Ethan Hopper climbed into this toy machine dispenser in Brisbane's south.
Glass? Perfect. Glass.
It took him seconds to get in after evading his parents.
If he goes to that back corner, you could tab it, but this one here, yeah.
Used to arresting hardened criminals, the quick-thinking officers came up with the perfect tactical response.
Are you able to get him to that back corner? Hey, Ethan, go to that back corner. No, to that corner over there. Go to mum.
To his delight, it was all part of the game.
Now, Ethan, cover your eyes, hide. He's peeking.
Then, with the swing of a hammer, he was freed.
Come here, buddy. There you go.
The inquisitive tot later fronted the media with his relieved parents.
Well, it's quite funny. I messaged my old man and he asked me how many $2 coins do I have. We can try and win them back.
He was stuck for 10 minutes yelling out free toys to his bemused parents.
But he was having the time of his life.
As for when the call came in...
And this is the first in 11 years of policing. I wasn't expecting this one to come up.
Ethan finally got a cuddly toy as his prize.
That's all right.
Then it was high fives and a big hug. A cheeky toddler with a cheeky tale to tell. Lexi Hamilton-Smith, ABC News.
And now to the weather with Herlyn, Kaur. Tell us there is some relief in sight, Herlyn.
There is, Pamela. We just need to get through tomorrow first. It was a scorching start to February as we saw some records tumble and some coming close, especially in the eastern suburbs. Bickley reached 42.1, just beating its previous record. Pearce Air Base and the Swan Valley got into the mid-40s, and in the city it rose from a low of 21.7 just before 5 a.m. to reach 42.6 degrees just after 11 a.m, a bit sooner than usual because of an early sea breeze. In the Midwest, Geraldton Airport had its hottest day in 12 years for the second day in a row, reaching 46.5, but it was also searing in the southwest. Bridgetown had its hottest day in 25 years with 42.6 degrees, and Collie set a new record high, 42.4 today. Nighttime temperatures were also above average right across the state. It only dropped to 30 degrees for both Newman and Meekatharra, and it was in the high teens across the south, but the coolest spot was again in Ayr, down to 5 degrees there. On the satellite, we still saw some significant convective cloud with thunderstorms over the country's north, especially in the east, bringing some rainfall. The troughs in the north led into one along the Gascoyne there, continuing all the way down the state's south coast, bringing the heat with it. That trough is set to move inland by tomorrow, cooling the west coast in time for the weekend. And then a weak cold front will also brush the south coast on Saturday, helping keep temperatures suppressed. Around the country, the sunshine is back in Brisbane, 33 degrees tomorrow, partly cloudy for Sydney, 28, 32 in the nation's capital, 21 for Melbourne, and a windy and cooler 18 in Hobart, Adelaide 29, and a partly cloudy 33 for Darwin. Back home, there's a chance of showers and gusty thunderstorms again, mostly in the afternoon and evening. In the north, mostly in the 40s right across the region. It'll be very hot again for the Central West and Goldfields tomorrow. Lots of towns will get into the low to mid 40s, 45 for Morawa and 42 in Kalgoorlie. In the south, another hot day ahead for much of the southwest. Bridgetown is forecast to reach 38, 41 for Collie. It'll be hot on the south coast as well, 38 in Ravensthorpe, 37 for Esperance, but Albany and Denmark will be milder in the 20s. There's an extreme fire danger forecast for a few districts with a total fire ban for parts of the Metro, Goldfields, Southwest, Lower West and Great Southern regions. We're still expecting a pretty uncomfortable day in the city, although not as hot as today, a top of 39 degrees from a low of 22 overnight. Winds on the local waters will be southerly up to 20 knots. The sun will rise at 5:42, setting at 18 minutes past 7. And we'll finally get some reprieve from this heat wave this weekend with a windy and partly cloudy Saturday, 31, before a sharper drop to 26 on Sunday, 27 for Monday. Cooler nights by then as well, down to 14 before heating up at the end of next week. Pamela.
Don't like the sound of that heating up again, Herlyn. That's ABC News for now. Brianna Shepherd will be with you tomorrow. In the meantime, of course, you can stay up to date with ABC News online, or you can catch the news anytime on ABC iView. Stay with us for 7:30.